exception handling, right? And the custom exceptions, how we can create and all, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I hope everyone like understood or everyone practice that scenarios like how we can create and so we handle some custom exceptions, right, with the user validation class, right? So today we'll be discussing about like how we can handle while overriding the exception handling, right? Uh, Not overriding the exception handling, but during the overriding, how we can handle the exception. So those things like we'll be discussing now. Okay. So there is like a parent and child concept, right? So inheritance concept. Okay. So in between during the inheritance and when you are overriding the methods. Okay. So what and all like we have to take care. So earlier I discussed right during overriding concept. So when we will be starting the exception handling, that time we'll be going to discuss some scenarios. So it will be helpful for like not only for the interviews, like when you are going to develop, when we are going to use any exception handling concept, there it will be useful. Okay. So now I'll share my screen. Okay. So I hope everyone able to see the screen, right? Okay. So there are different scenarios. Like there are a few different scenarios like when we are handling while using the overriding concept, you have to handle the exceptions. Okay. You have to handle the exceptions in such a way. Okay. So if like we have a parent class and child class concept. Okay. So the parent class has the same method and the child classes also have the same method. If we use okay. So those keywords basically we will be using like method level in order to throw any exception on the we are going to use a throws, not throw. Throw is like in order to create our custom exception class objects. If you want to throw, we can use a throw, and in order to create in order to use a throws, right? So the method level we are going to use. Okay. Let's take the rules. Okay, there are many rules if you are going to discuss overriding. So if um, so just note down some bullet points like if parent class does not declare an exception. Okay, think if parent class does not declare an exception, the subclass overridden method cannot declare checked exception. So what is checked exception? Nothing but like compile time exceptions. So if parent class does not declare like an exception, the subclass means the child class overridden method, okay, cannot declare checked exception. It can be declared unchecked exception. Right. So that is the one rule. The other one, first rule is if the parent class method does not declare an exception, the subclass overridden method can declare means cannot declare checked exception. We can declare unchecked exception. Okay. The other one, yeah. So parent class declares an exception, subclass overridden method can declare the same exception. So, if, for example, if parent class declares some exception class, so subclass overridden method can declare the same and subclass exception, not parent class exception, because scope wise it will be different, right? So, for example, in parent class method throws an exception, subclass overridden method can declare the same exception or subclass exception, but we should not throw the parent class exception. So in that case, the parent class method declares an exception as um, null point exception. Okay, null point exception. Okay, subclass overridden method should not declare a parent exception. Right. So parent exception means exception class. So in that case, our code will not compile. So all these rules, right? All these rules in the interview they are going to ask. All these rules in the interview they are going to ask, and they'll ask these type of questions and check like whether we will be knowing the scenarios or not during overriding. So let's take here the class A and class B extends A. On both methods we have a print. Okay, both classes we have a print. Okay, so now just remove this. Okay, so in this case, so our first point is if parent class method does not declare an exception, child class method can declare. Child class method cannot declare the checked exception, can declare unchecked exception. Okay, so my parent class method is not throwing any exception. Okay, the child class method throws the pointer. So in this case, if you are not getting any error, then our code will compile, or else we'll we'll discuss in this scenario. Okay, let's take this class A and class B. Okay, just copy this code. The notepad will explain so that you can easily guess the answers. Compile during compilation time only it will throw. Okay, so we got that. So now just go back to the location. Go back to the location. Java programs. Okay. So now our class is, see, our if parent class method does not declare an exception. Subclass overridden method can declare, this method can throws, it should not throw checked exception, it should throw unchecked exception. So in that case, we are not going to get any compile time error. We are not going to get any compile time error. So just remove this concept. Just save this class. Try to compile. It happily compiled. So code got compiled. So in that case, if I am passing here exception or SQL exception is compile time exception. Okay, means checked exception. So our point is, okay. So our point is, if parent class method does not declare the exception, does not declare means we are not throwing any exception. Okay, subclass subclass is nothing but child class. Okay, here we use a parent, right? So child class overridden. Okay, overridden method can declare, subclass overridden method can declare unchecked exception, unchecked exceptions. So parent class method can declare unchecked exceptions. So what we are telling, the parent class method does not declare the exception. The child class overridden method can declare the unchecked exceptions, but cannot declare checked exceptions. So our intention is, like, if parent class method does not declare any exception. Okay, so we are not declare any exceptions. So subclass overridden method can declare subclass overridden means the child class, right? The child class overridden method can declare unchecked exception, but see, unchecked exception means null point exception is like an unchecked exception. Means it is going to throw, it is going to execute like it is going to done at during the runtime. So in that case, the child class method throws null point exception. So in that case, parent class method does not throw any exception. The subclass overridden method can throw only unchecked exceptions. We cannot throw checked exceptions. So in this case, our program will compile. Our program will compile. Okay. So now what I'm doing here, we cannot declare the checked exceptions. So checked exceptions. Let's take an example. Checked exceptions. SQL exception is a checked exception, right? Let's now try to compile. See, here it is throwing an exception. Overridden method does not throw SQL exception because see the statement what it is saying. If parent class method does not declare the exception, child class overridden method can declare unchecked exception. Not only null point exception, just arithmetic exception. So arithmetic exception is nothing but like a runtime, right? It is going to throw runtime. So SQL exception is compile time. That's why it is throwing an exception. So in this case, now if you compile, it will happily compile because this exception belongs to means arithmetic exception belongs to runtime, right? So you can write down here runtime exception also. Let's copy this. Let's compile this one. It is compiling because this is a runtime exception means it is going to execute during the runtime, right? So that's the reason if parent class method does not declare an exception, the child class overridden method should always throw unchecked exception. We should not throw checked exception. So here the SQL exception is a checked exception. Here SQL exception is checked exception. So exception, throwing exception. Let's see what is the output. Exception will have both, right? Exception we have two different types. One is like compile time exception, runtime exception. But runtime exceptions completely it will be under having the category of all runtime exceptions. Okay, so that is the one. Okay, so this is a one point. Okay. The second point. So if superclass method does not declare an exception, subclass overridden method can declare checked exception. So that is if superclass method does not declare an exception, subclass overridden method cannot declare the checked exception. We already covered. Okay. So in that case, we already got an exception. Means it is throwing compile time error. So if superclass or parent class, we use parent class. Parent class, parent class method does not declare an exception. Copy this. Parent class method does not declare an exception. Okay, and subclass overridden method means child class overridden method can declare checked exceptions, but not. One second. If parent class method does not declare an exception, okay, and subclass overridden method cannot declare checked exception, but we can declare unchecked exception. So this is also we covered already like this. We'll do one thing. We'll write down in the scenario wise examples. Okay, in this case, parent class method does not declare an exception. Subclass method should not declare a checked exceptions. It can be declared unchecked exceptions. Okay. So here the second point: if parent class method does not declare an exception, child class method okay, child class method the parent class method does not declare an exception. Okay, subclass means child class method cannot declare a checked exception, but it can declare unchecked exceptions. Okay, same example. Subclass method can declare the unchecked exception. Okay. So now here I can write down null pointer exception. Right? So that is the one. The other one. So like that you can practice. Okay, like that you can practice. So the other one, if superclass method declares an exception. Okay, if superclass declares an exception. So what we discussed, if superclass method declares an exception, subclass overridden method can declare the same exception or subclass exception, same or subclass, but we cannot declare parent class exception. Okay, so if superclass method declares an exception and parent class method declares same exception or subclass, because during overriding also, like we are following the scopes, right, the same way. So exception hierarchy also important during overriding. So declares the child class method declares the same or subclass exception but not parent class exception. So it will be like a quite confusing concept, definitely. Sometimes like if you are not revising, then definitely like everyone will get confused. Okay. So just copy this. Okay, just copy this from the based on the statement. Okay, what we are telling in the statement, if superclass declares an exception. Okay, now I'm going to use throws exception. Throws exception. Okay. So if superclass method declares an exception, child class method declares the same exception. Okay. Same exception means okay. Now I'm going to pass throws an exception. Throws an exception. So the same code we are copying paste and see whether this code will compile or not. It is the same type, right? Child class method declares the same type of exception. Okay, so here we are throwing exception, here we are throwing exception. Just run this class. This will compile because if parent class method throws an exception, earlier scenario we are not throwing. Now this scenario, the parent class method we are throwing. Parent class method, if we throw an exception, subclass overridden method should throw same exception or child exception. For example, now this is compiled. Okay, we are telling right here subclass the same exception or subclass exception. Okay, so throws an exception. Here I am going to write IOE exception. IOE exception. So in this case, see, subclass exception not declare a parent exception. See, because see, if you are writing here IO exception and you are writing here exception, then that case will be getting compile time error, because here we can declare IO exception, here we can declare IO exception, same time. But the child class, when you are going to write down throwing any exception handling concept, so always you have to concentrate the child class method. If parent class method throws an exception, it has to throw the same or either child class exception, but you should not throw parent class exception. Okay. So in this case, just combine. So in this case, it is going to compile because it is throwing an exception. Child class exception is like IO exception is a child class of exception only, right? Then in that case, it is going to compile. If you practice, then you will get some confidence.
You just received a text message. You just received a text.
1 second. Parent class method. Okay, parent class method declares an exception. Child class method declares the same exception. Okay. The parent class method does not declare an exception. Subclass method can declare a checked exception. Okay. I think this is applicable for checked exception, but IO exception is a checked exception only, right? Okay. Parent class method does not declare an exception. It's equal to okay. Subclass exception, but not subclass exception, but not a parent class exception. So, what the rule if superclass does not declare superclass method does not declare an exception, subclass overridden method can declare same. Method declares an exception. It will be same. Okay. Subclass exception. One second, yes. Okay, so subclass overridden subclass exception. Child class method declares the same exception. So what is a rule if parent class method does not declare an exception? Parent class method declares an exception. That is true. Subclass child class method throws declares the same exception or subclass exception. 1 second, we'll write in IOI exception. In that case, it will work. Copy this. So what is it? Parent cannot find the symbol. Any code changes we done? Class A throws IO exception. Class B throws IO exception. Main method and end of the concept. Method, class, method, main method. It is correct only, right? Open brace method, it is
Like
complete.
one bracket extra, I think now. Correct.
Where I think we removed, no? Earlier it was there.
Yeah.
Earlier it was there, we removed that. We didn't save that. Okay, here it is there, I think. Huh?
Two.
Let's see. Now it is showing exact, okay. Cannot find a symbol void print through IOE exception. What is that exception name? I think IOE error exception. Any spelling wrong? Just throw same exception also here. I don't know why the compiler is used. Here it is compiling. What happened to Notepad? Okay, anyway, we are not calling any method and all. Just if we call no, then we come to know. Also declaration. Just run this. Here it is compiling. Go back to throw method here. V dot. So if you get confused, or don't confuse, you practice, then you can easily remember. I will try to import man. Understood, right? Why the notepad it is not recognizing.
Okay. Good. I know.
It is compiled now. It is compiled. Okay. So our scenario is if parent class method throws an exception. Sorry, not here. We have to edit here. Parent class method throws an exception. Subclass overridden method and throws IO exception. It is compiled. Okay. Child we can throw. So if you are making Ulta right, so for example, parent class method throws IOI exception. The child class method can throw same type of exception or parent we should not use parent. We should not use. I think by this time we'll get compile them issue. Yeah. So our statement is here. Where it is. Yeah. So superclass method declares an exception. Child class method declares a same exception. Okay. That we already saw. So if you declare here exception, it is going to work out. Same type, right? Exception, it is going to work out. It is going to compile. Just save. Is it? Must be got somewhere. Just remove that. It's not required. Parent one already. Just compile this. Unreported exception must be sorted or declared. So what? Same type only, right? Resolved compatibility type. Line number 26. We dot. Okay. It is. We need to. We are using this logic, right? Exception. This runs. But earlier logic we used. Okay, I think here we need to throw, when we are calling the methods, there might be chances, because this method, when we are calling, right, this method throws an exception, right? That's the reason from where we are calling this method, in the main method, right? That method also should strictly follow to throw that exception. That's why like compiler is restricting, okay, throws this exception. Now I think it's going to be correct. Why? Because in the main method we are creating the object and we are calling the, what is that, print method? Huh? Print method we are calling. So this print method throws an exception, right? So that's the reason compiler is checking, like there might be chances. Here also if you get an exception, who is going to handle? So that's why it is going to ask the compiler, means compiler is asking throw that exception. Okay. So just come back here. It is compiled. Okay. So now if I use on this one, if I use, okay, so now if I use here IOE exception, okay, IOE exception, what our statement is, if parent class subclass, okay, subclass exception but not a parent class exception. So this time we will be getting compiled them error, because it should not throw an exception, because we didn't save, sorry, not this file. Here we throws an exception, means always like a parent will have a more scope, right? So that's the reason. See here we are throwing some compile time exception. Okay, that too. See this is like the parent type, right? This is a parent type, right? See we already thrown the exception, but it is not. It is not a compatible type. It is not a compatible type. See here, what we are discussing this point. Superclass method declares an exception, child class method declares the same. Either it is the same exception in the parent class what we discussed, or subclass we can use. But in the same scenario, if you write down here exception, if you write down here IO exception, it is going to compile, because so either it is the same exception or child exception. So IO exception is a child class exception, right? So in that case, it is going to work. In that case, it is going to work. Okay. And the other scenarios. For example, if parent class method does not throw any exception. Parent class method does not throw any exception. So the child class method, if you are throwing an IOE exception. The child class method, if you are throwing IOE exception. So this time, if parent class method does not throw any exception, child class method can throw either. What we can throw? We should not throw checked exceptions, right? We should not throw checked exceptions because IOE exception is a checked exception. Here we are going to get now error because the parent class method not throwing any exception. The child class method can throw runtime exceptions, but not compile time exceptions. Clear? So the same scenario, if I am using some null point exception in this case, will it work? Yes. Will it work or not? It is going to work because null point exception is runtime exception. It is going to work. It is going to work. So if I am my parent class method throws exception. My parent class method throws an exception. So in that case, we are throwing null point exception. So in that case, just throw here null point exception, throw exception. In that case,
It will not work.
it will not work because see this is like a child class exception, that too runtime exception. But here we are throwing compile time. That too it is a parent exception. It is a parent exception. So that's why it is not going to compile. It is not going to compile. Clear?
Yes, sir.
If I use like a parent exception there, the same reverse, vice versa. Like I'm using an exception here and I'm throwing here exception. In that case, compile exception, it will compile. So it will compile. The same scenario because like the parent class method will have more scope. Parent class will have a more scope. It will compile. Not saved. It will compile. Now if I remove throw exception, if I remove this case,
It's compulsory.
it's compiled because so we are throwing in the child method we are not throwing a checked exception, we are throwing unchecked exception. So unchecked exception is runtime exception. So now it is going to compile. Now in this case, if I am passing exception,
Compulsory.
parent class method, first point we discussed right already. Parent class method
Does not
does not declare an exception. Child class overridden method can declare unchecked exception, but we cannot declare checked exception. So in the code, we are throwing checked exception. Exception is nothing but like a checked exception only. Compile. Going to use compile. Here, so when see it is not only for the predefined like exceptions. We can throw user defined exceptions also. So we created yesterday insufficient fund exception. user not found exception and all, right? So in that case, we can use those exceptions also. See, can't we create like these exceptions as account creation exception, right? So can't we create like this? Okay, this is going to extend time exception. We can create like this, right? So now I'm going to write, okay, account creation exception. What? It is like a parent type of exception. Now I am going to create specific type of exception, savings account. Just copy paste. So in that case, I can extend account creation exception. Clear or not? The savings account creation exception extends. See, in projects, definitely we are going to use this kind of exception. See, if this is possible, this is also possible, right? This account creation exception already extends the runtime exception. No account create exception. So this is like in that case, like that we can extend, we can create our own classes and we can create our own custom exception classes and we can do it, right? So like that we are going to do, like that we are going to extend. So this loan creation exception already extends account creation. Account creation is here and this is extends to exception. So then this is going to extend the exception class and exception class is going to extend throwable. So like that the hierarchy from here to there. Like what is this kind of inheritance? Like account creation class extends the runtime. Runtime class extends the exception. Exception class extends the throwable. What type of exception it was?
Like from child to parent, we are writing.
Multi level, right?
Uh, Inheritance, multi-level.
Multi level. 1 second, guys. I'm getting call from myself. Okay, so we're going to discuss it. So like that we can write down and we can throw the exceptions and we can use. Okay. So going forward in Servlet or JSP or Spring, right? Spring or RESTful web services when we are going to discuss, right? So there also, like we are going to use exception handling concept. Okay. So if you are not understanding this concept now itself, then you may not understand that time in advanced Java. So in advanced Java, so we are using like in Spring or RESTful web services, we are handling the exceptions globally. In the Postman, right? So we are going to return some exception saying that 404 user resource like user ID is not available, okay, and status code and the error message, detailed message, okay, from which component it got, okay. So all these things like we can use it. So but in the real time, right, how it will be, no, when you are using like this, not this one. Where is yesterday's user validation exception, right? So you can, instead of here, right? So in order to in order to throw some exceptions, okay, it has to accept some message, okay, and that message, right? We should not. So this is not a best practice, okay. All these things like we can provide in one constant file, error constants. So nothing but like how we are going to create like this. We are going to create error constants. It is a common for every class, like every in the project. It is a common. So for example, if it is an empty, if it is an empty, so now you are going to create like private, unprivate, public. You have to use because yeah, it will be constants and all. It will be useful, visible for entire. Public static, final, string. Let's say for example, user underscore empty. Okay. So like this, we are going to provide. We are not we are not using this message here. Okay. So we are what we are going to do. Okay. How how you are going to read? How you are going to read this one, right? Simply like you are using error constants, dot user. That is using. What is the problem? Is in debug mode or we didn't save that file. That is a problem. We didn't save. That's why it is unable to recognize. See. So in this case, see, this is like a best practice. Like when you are like best exception handling when you are using any constants like error constants. In every project, will be having some error constants. Then there, if you want to run this, okay. So now, if it is an empty, now what it is going to do? Yes, it is an empty. Now what it will do? No, like it is going to execute. It is going to execute. See. The same thing, right? It is going to refer that constant, and from there we are reading the message. From there we are reading the message. Hello. So like that you can refer like that you can refer like error constants. Instead of writing here, you can write down error constants, and we can write down one more status, like one more constructor. There we can pass some status codes and the error message and error constants. So all like that going forward we can see like when we are using like when we are communicating from web services how this uh, if any if there any resource is not available then how we are going to send. For example, we created one user ID. That user ID is it is not available in backend. We deleted, but still we are trying to access that ID. That ID is not available. So we are sending that HTTP status 404 requested resource requested ID is not available in our record. or database like that. So like that we are going to, you can declare like the constants here directly from here you can read. So why I used capital here? Anyone knows? But in the first class we discussed when we are not first class when we are going to discuss some coding standards. Constants like always we need to declare as a capital. Always we need to declare as a capital. Okay. So now that is okay. Now you understood, right? So there are some concepts. Just go through the exception propagation and what is the difference between throws and difference between throws and exception propagation. Nothing will be there. So somewhere we are going to call one method, and that method is going to call in a different method, and that somewhere it is going to throw an exception. Take this an example. So int m equal to data divided by like 60 by 0. Now if we can see, we are going to create an object on the object dot p. We are calling this method. We are calling this method. And inside p method we are calling n method. N method we are calling m method. But actual exception has been thrown here. From here to here it is going to propagate. From here to here it is going to propagate. Okay. So other concept is try with the resources. Okay. And one more feature they have introduced from I think from 1.7 or 8. I'm not sure exactly the version, but they have introduced like one more concept. The exception, some interview questions like they are going to ask. Just close this. Yeah. So if you see here, so we are using the pipe symbol. We are using the pipe symbol instead of writing the multi-catch, right? Instead of writing the multi-catch, they are going to write down the exceptions. Arithmetic exception, null point exception, array index of compound exception. So finally, you can use. So the catch block it is going to consider. You cannot use exception. Huh? What it is showing? Okay, it will be applicable for only the child classes, I guess, because after writing the exception, it is showing that it is telling that it's try with the multi-catch block, right? How we are going to write down? At last, we are writing the exception, right? Let's see whether to write down here and we'll see. No. Parent class exception it is not allowing because it is telling already cached. Okay, this is like in order to write down some subclass exceptions. Okay, I think we can write down the other catch block. We'll see here. The other catch block. The other catch block we can write down. I think this is the way we need to handle. I think so. We can reduce some in the same catch block. In the same catch block, like we are handling all the subtype of exceptions. At the end, we are handling. If it is not, then other than this exception, so other than this means like it is going to catch here. So run this. So it is going to display line dot arithmetic exception divisible by 0. Okay. So almost like we completed like exception handling concepts. So major like the important concepts we discussed. just the theory part, just go the difference between what happened, like if I'm writing try catch block, and then if I write try with the finally possible, right?
Yes, sir, but it is not the best practice.
It is not a best practice. Like for example, if any exception occurred, right, how we can catch that? Like how the programmer like try with the finally is possible, but it's not a best practice because so always like when we are writing the code, always like we have to think about like our like the way we are writing the code, and it should be in an efficient manner. And if further any exceptions occurred, any abnormalities occurred in that particular program, if you are not using catch block, then no one is going to trace that. No one is going to trace. So, for example, if in the class we have some thousand lines, if you are not properly handling the exception handling, even though you have written, even though we develop the project, no use. If any exception occur in the production, then it is not useful. It is not useful. So that's the reason every interview they'll ask like exception handling. They'll cross check whether you will be having a knowledge on exception handling or not. Okay. So just try with these examples. Okay. And we will discuss the next topic. I'm not going to discuss the file concept, what is buffer reader, what is file reader, file output stream, input stream. I'll be explaining only five classes: file input stream, output stream, object input stream, object output stream, serialization. In the files, important concept is the serialization concept. So, in real time, like in the projects, definitely our Poja classes we are implementing the serializable interface. So we'll see like how we can serialize, how we can deserialize. After serializing the object in our Poja class, if you are modifying any properties, then what will be the output? All the things like we'll be discussing what is serial version UID, all the things. So files concept, I think like one day is enough. Okay, one day is enough. We'll discuss the files concept on the next class. Okay, and then we'll start either streams or multi-threading. Multi-threading definitely will take some 2 to 3 days of time to completion, and then after that we will start collections. Okay, just practice these rules, no? Just practice these rules so that we can easily understand and you won't get confused. Definitely will be confusing, but if you remember at least one point, if you are going to remember at least 1 or 2 points, then you can easily cross check and then you can easily guess the answer. Okay, so just it is already there in the Java point. Just go here and many interviews, many interviewers will confuse. Okay, just go over the scenarios, then you can easily understand. Okay, very very important concept in exception handling. While you are using overriding concept, you should understand this concept. Okay? But anyway, in the IDE, right, when you are developing, then if it is going to identify immediately, then you can easily understood uh, what is the problem. But these kind of questions they are not going to ask in the IDEs. They are going to ask in the notepad. Okay, just try to practice. In the next class, we'll start serialization. Like we'll see like how we can create a file and how we can write the content into the file, and then after writing the content, how we can load the content using file, and we can use the serialization. Okay, so that's all about today's class. We'll discuss the remaining concepts on next class. Thank you guys.
ସାର୍ଙ୍କର ବହୁତ କଥା ମତେ କହିଲା ହେଲା କୋଉ ରେକର୍ଡିଂ କରିଥାନ୍ତି ସବୁ ସାର୍ଙ୍କର କହିବା
Open name.